How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the Actual Zone Arcade. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. I wanted to try my hand at a discussion video, so I hope you enjoy. This topic is something I've had in mind for a long time that I feel I don't see a lot of people talk about, even with all the Sonic discussion you see online. So yeah, you've read the title and clicked on the video, so I guess you were curious enough to know exactly what I mean by the hidden Sonic cycle. Well, let's talk about it. But I warn you that you may never see this franchise the same way again. So first of all, what is the Sonic cycle? There are a lot of different interpretations, but the popular one seems to revolve around the release and hype cycle for an individual game in the series. It usually goes something to the effect of new Sonic game gets announced and people are hyped, more information on the game comes out and opinions start to sway more negatively, the game comes out and then turns out to be a disappointment with fans and critics, and then the cycle repeats. Now, this is a massive generalization, and a good number of recent games have actually had an opposite effect to the one described here. I mean, just look at Sonic Frontiers. People were dead-ass calling for the game to get delayed, and throwing what I can only describe as an absolute shit fit over that initial gameplay reveal. More trailers came out that showed more promise, and then the game released to moderate critical success, and a lot of happy fans. Even if some nowadays are kinda hot and cold about it. Anyway, it was worth bringing this up so you can now understand the concept of the Sonic cycle, even if realistically there's only a handful of games it applies to. However, there is a trend with the games it does apply to. One that I get a good feeling you haven't noticed. Sonic is a franchise that has existed across 4 decades. The 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and the current 2020s. In that time, there's been a lot of ups and downs when it comes to all aspects of the franchise. While the focus of the Sonic cycle topic is usually on the games, I feel it's worth mentioning other media as well. I think it's going to be especially relevant here. But what you might not realize is that there's a pattern to these ups and downs. Let me break it down. Okay, wait, not like that. So, a decade starts out, and Sonic is riding high. Plenty of new projects released that are almost all acclaimed to some degree. Things are looking bright for the future. Then, somewhere around the middle, things start to get a little lost in the sauce. This is usually due to a lack of meaningful releases, botched releases, or even both. You could say it's something of a dark age. That's right. I believe every decade of Sonic had a dark age to some degree. But then towards the end, we see a small turnaround, and eventually, Sonic is back on top with more well-received projects as we move into the next decade. This is the true Sonic cycle, and it's been there since the very beginning. So let's go through each decade one by one, analyzing this repeated pattern. The 90s. What a time to be alive. I wouldn't know anything about that as a 2000s kid. Anyway, Sonic first burst onto the scene back in 91 with the hit game, Speedy the Needle Mouse. But yeah, the dude was an instant success, mostly in the West, spawning multiple sequels, spin-offs, collabs, comics, TV shows, this fucking thing. You name it, he was there. Sonic just could not miss from 1991 to 1994. But then 1995 hit and things were notably quieter. His 2 very different TV shows had aired their final episodes the year prior. No new mainline game was released, and it felt like Sonic Mania was dying out. No, not that one. That year, the only projects we got were a bunch of Game Gear games of middling to just straight up bad quality, a compilation and a spin-off featuring Knuckles on a failed add-on to a console that was already on its way out where he wasn't even intended to be the main focus. Wait, that last part sounded kind of familiar.
The Flames of Disaster!
And yes, Knuckles Chaotix is actually a good game, you guys just simply don't see the vision. But it wasn't quite as praised as Sonic's mainline entries. 1996 was a weird year also. The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog came back with a one-off Christmas special featuring Sally from Sat AM looking noticeably more pink, only for that to be the last episode the show would ever produce. Over in Japan, we got a much more game-accurate animated adaptation in the form of the Sonic OVA, and this is by far the best thing to come from this year, though it would only get an English release as the Sonic the Hedgehog movie in 1999. I really want to talk about this thing one day, so let me know if you want to see that. Sonic the Fighters came out and was the first fully 3D Sonic game and is actually a pretty damn good game in its own right, but ultimately wasn't as well received as other fighting games at the time such as Virtua Fighter and Tekken. That just leaves us with these. Sonic 3D Blast was a very unfortunate game that was made in about 8 months off the back of a delayed, and eventually cancelled, Sonic Extreme. Sonic Blast is an attempt to bring these pre-rendered graphics to an 8-bit handheld and is arguably the worst game in the entire series and unarguably the ugliest. Oh, and there's Sonic the Hedgehog's game world, I guess. 1997 was comparatively quiet compared to prior years, with the only releases being Sonic R, Sonic Jam, and Sonic & Knuckles Collection for PC. Two of those are just game collections, pretty cool ones, one of which gave us our first fully 3D Sonic platformer experience. And then Sonic R, even with the cult following it has now, wasn't super well received for its poor controls and lacking track selection, with only 5 available. And as much as the soundtrack slaps, people found it out of place and strange in a racing game back then. It's like the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 situation all over again. People in the late 90s just couldn't appreciate a good soundtrack. 1998 was very quiet, with basically no release outside of this. Which I'd rather pretend does not exist. That was until a dream was cast, an adventure began. It's safe to say that Sonic's absence on the Saturn hurt the brand a little and Sega a lot in the West. That means they had to come out swinging on the new Dreamcast with an all-new Sonic that will define a new generation. Now, you might think one game release isn't enough to carry the end of a decade entirely on its own, and you would be stupid. The hype for this game was palpable, and that's reflected in the sea of praise this game got. 1 year later, in 1999, we got a Western release for the game, and that English version of the OVA I mentioned before, so a great start to the year already. We also got that epic and critically acclaimed Sonic and Garfield pack, which changed the landscape of gaming forever. Sonic Pocket Adventure also released as a neat little 8-bit adventure that kinda acts as a nice transition point from the classic Sonic aesthetics to the more modern look we're used to. Oh, and this is the only Sonic game to have the honor of being given a perfect 10 out of 10 score from IGN. So that's kinda wild. And finally, to close out this crazy beginning decade for the Sonic franchise, we got goddamn Sonic Underground! Yeah, that shit was hot ass. Let's move on to the 2000s. I feel like this one's going to be a little more straightforward because we all know where things start to go crazy. The only Sonic project to release in the year 2000 was Sonic Shuffle. Not sure what to say about this one because I never played it and it just looks bizarre. But from 2001 to 2004, we were once again getting consistent Sonic releases that were all highly praised. Sonic Adventure 2 is still one of the highest rated Sonic things ever. Sonic Heroes had more mixed reception but still remained mostly positive, and the Sonic Advance series was seen as an incredible follow-up to the classics. The Sonic X anime began airing in 2003, and newborn me would have been locked in if he wasn't too busy doing baby stuff. Tons of cool spin-offs like Sonic Battle and great compilations like Sonic Mega Collection also dropped. Oh, and look at that, he's back at McDonald's again. To say Sonic was back was an understatement. The franchise just caught a second wind and became very comfortable as a third party. That was until Shadow the Hedgehog hit. 2005 was weird. We got Sonic Rush, another game that was still highly acclaimed. Sonic Gems collection came out and included some very cool games that most of us likely would have never played without it. But Shadow the Hedgehog kinda, well, overshadowed the rest of them. I will see myself out. This was the first time a major Sonic title was panned on release, a trend that would unfortunately grow larger and larger as time went on. It might be his year now, and Sega is finally fully embracing this game, but it did start off what's commonly known as the Sonic Dark Age. Even though only a handful of games that came out here were actually bad. Then 2006 rolled around with a new Sonic racing game and Sonic Riders that, while enjoyed by fans, got mixed reception due to its steep learning curve. We also got a terribly botched port of Sonic 1 on GBA the same day as the legendary Sonic 06, a game that needs no introduction. This was also the year Sonic X ended, with its third season never seeing a Japanese release until 13 years later in 2019. An infamously rough year for the series that we're still feeling the effects of today. But I guess we got Sonic Rivals? I don't even know what the consensus is on this one. 2007 fares a little bit better with Sonic and the Secret Rings releasing. Okay, I know what you're thinking, just hear me out. This game actually wasn't criticized super harshly when it came out. Likely because this was just off the back of 06. The game is abysmal dogshit though, so I think it fits the narrative here. Sonic Rush Adventure was a great, and in my opinion superior, follow-up to the first game. And how could I forget Sonic X for the Leapstar, only the greatest product to come from the Sonic franchise. But the biggest thing to happen this year was the first ever collaboration between Hedgehog and Plumber. The Mario and Sonic Olympic games were a pretty huge deal, and it sucks we don't have them now. But it's weird that their first idea was to bring these two titans together and have them compete in real-world sports. And we got Sonic Rivals 2. Seriously, what do people even think about these games? Does anyone even think about them at all? 2008 only really had one flop in the form of Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood, with everything else ranging from good to great. We got Sega Superstars Tennis, which might not count as a Sonic game necessarily, but it is a fun little spin-off. Sonic Riders Zero Gravity seemed to be about as well received as the first, with the main issue this time being the game's heavily simplified controls and strangely more intense story. Guess they took the criticism from the first one a little too far in the opposite direction. Sonic even finally joined Smash Bros, making him the second third-party character to make his way into that series, and is the only one that has remained in every entry since. And then we have the big one. Sonic Unleashed released with an HD version for PS3 and Xbox 360, and an SD version for Wii and PS2. The game was unfairly bashed by pretty much every gaming outlet at the time due to a growing stigma that the Sonic franchise is of poor quality, leading to reviews even lower than 06. It had its fans, but most of the public had decided. The game had something of a turnaround in recent years though, now being considered one of the greatest games in the series. For that reason, I would still say Unleashed contributed to the decade ending smoothly, and I'd even throw 2009 Sonic and the Black Knight in there. This game was slammed when it came out, and even if I don't personally love it either, I can tell you this game has a very supportive fanbase nowadays. Speaking of 2009, we got Sonic's Ultimate Genesis/Mega Drive collection, Sonic PC collection, and Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games. All great releases, but they pale in comparison to the might of the Sonic Unleashed Java phone port. So yeah, things got pretty hairy around the middle, and depending on who you ask, the entire second half of the decade was either absolute peak or complete arse. I still think things ended pretty alright here. On to the 2010s. So this is obviously the last complete decade as of this video being made, and it might be the most inconsistent. We started very strong from 2010 to 2012 with amazing games like the Sonic and All-Stars Racing Duology, Sonic Colors, both console and handheld versions, as well as the immaculate Sonic Generations. 2012 also gave us the best Mario and Sonic Olympic games with London 2012. But we did also start 2010 with Sonic Free Riders and Sonic 4 Episode 1, which kinda speak for themselves. These are outliers though. Heck, Sonic even made his big screen debut in Wreck-It Ralph, which is kinda nuts. This is also where mobile games started to pop up a ton, with the big ones around this time being Sonic Jump and Sonic Dash. And then the mid-decade curse hit early this time in 2013. Let's just get the big one out of the way first. Sonic Lost World and its 3DS counterpart are mediocre at best and downright insulting at worst. The 3DS version of Lost World I genuinely believe is the worst game in the entire franchise, no joke. Mario and Sonic at the 2014 Winter Games was by far the worst entry in that series also, so we're not doing great. This year did give us the awesome Sonic and Mega Man crossover in the comics, as well as Christian Whitehead mobile ports of Sonic 1 and 2 that were the definitive versions of those games for a long time. But unfortunately the two biggest releases were just too much of a letdown to ignore. And then in 2014, a big boom hit. A boom that would force Sega to restructure, resulting in a Sonic content drought in 2015 and 2016. The only things to release in those years were more episodes of Sonic Boom, which was actually a pretty damn good comedy show, Sonic Runners, a fun mobile game that was stuffed with gambling elements that forced it to close its doors less than a year in, Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, and Mario and Sonic at the 2016 Olympic Games. The 2016 Olympics being an improvement over the 2014 Winter Games, but still not even on the level of the 2008 entry. Fire and Ice I've heard is pretty alright, but the Boom brand had already done its damage by that time, so it really didn't matter. The best thing to come from this period, surprisingly and weirdly enough, was Sonic's appearance in LEGO Dimensions. A lot of cool references and love for the franchise was put into this, and it led to the solid partnership Sonic has with LEGO today. 2017 was a pretty big turning point, if not for one thing. Sonic Mania did so much to revitalize confidence in Sonic, bringing a lot of people back into the franchise they were falling out of love with after the Boom era. I was one of those people. It felt great having a game that was so universally praised again, and then 3 months later we got Sonic Forces. This is another one where there really isn't much to say that you don't already know, but the game was a massive disappointment. It still wasn't enough to break the hype Mania brought, and we did get other stuff like Sonic Runner's Adventure and the final episodes of Sonic Boom, which marked the end of that sub-franchise. We did also get a version of Sonic Forces that was better than the main release and is still active today, with Sonic Forces Speed Battle on mobile. 2018 was fairly chill. We got the Sonic Mania Plus expansion that added more cool stuff to an already near-perfect game, and the launch of the IDW Sonic comics. If you didn't know, Archie had ended publication just a year prior due to legal issues, contracts, licensing, all the boring stuff that usually leads to series getting cancelled. So Sonic found a new home here. More ports and collections also came out, which is always welcome. We also got our first Sonic YouTube animation in the form of the Sonic Mania Adventures series, which was a really fun watch that even got a Christmas special that year. And finally, 2019 saw the release of Team Sonic Racing, a really fun racing game even if lacking in some features and had a very unfortunate release timing. We also got the final entry in the Mario and Sonic Olympic games that I would say finally surpassed the original game after so long, but it still isn't at the height of the London 2012 games. There was also a mobile spin-off for Team Sonic Racing that dropped the team in the title, so I guess this motherfucker wants to take all the credit, and more animations such as TSR Overdrive and Chow in Space. He even made a guest appearance in the show OKKO, which is probably the only episode I and many others have seen from the show. Is it worth a full watch? Let me know in the comments. But we all know what the biggest, most earth-shattering event of this year was. Avengers Endgame. But the second biggest was the first Sonic movie trailer, which absolutely gutted any momentum Sonic just got over the last couple years. It was... You just had to be there, man. That was until they went back and actually listened with a much better looking Sonic, which they showed off in a trailer that closed out this decade. What a roller coaster. I feel like the ups and downs were much harsher in the 2010s. The highs were some of the highest and the lows were extremely low. But pinpointing the worst period was so easy, you already knew it going in. A lot went wrong with the Boom initiative, and I think it's safe to say nothing like that will happen again. And that just leaves us with the current decade we're in, the 2020s. Sonic is arguably more popular now than ever before, with 2 blockbuster movies and a third on the way, an extremely popular Netflix series that, although not loved by fans, has proven to be a big success, and games that show confidence again. Sonic is back and bolder than ever, and we love to see it. But how long will that last? Given what we've talked about today, shouldn't we be worried? I mean, we are bordering on that midway point where things start to go downhill, aren't we? Well, let me tell you why I think this trend ends in the 2020s. The simple fact is, Sega has truly seen how much of a juggernaut Sonic has the potential to be, so they're more focused than ever on delivering us quality products. They know how turbulent things have been in the past and are actively working towards a brighter future. There clearly seems to be more confidence in the brand, both from Sega and their collaborators, and a general feeling of hype around it from the fans. I genuinely believe we're in the best period this franchise has ever seen, with even more growth to come soon. I'm not worried at all that we'll go through this hidden Sonic cycle again, and you shouldn't be either. Things are going to be different this time. So yeah, finally got this one off my chest. I know parts of this seemed pretty negative, and that made it hard for me to write in a way that was satisfying, but ultimately I just tried to keep it strictly to the facts and present this concept I've been thinking about. It's just one of those funny patterns I noticed, seeing a decade start out so strong, falter around the middle, and then kinda get back on track near the end for Sonic. I hope this was something eye-opening and informative, and I also hope you walked away from this with hope for the future. I'd love to cover more discussion topics like this, and I invite you to add your own opinions and context down in the comments like always. Leave a nice little like if you enjoyed this, it helps boost us in that algorithm, and subscribe for more. I want to spread more positive vibes and share more interesting tidbits in the Sonic community, so the more we grow, the better I can do that. Go follow our YouTube live channel and Twitch page if you want to keep up with some live stream madness, and I'll see you in the next one.